All right, we are glad to have John home. He finally made it in Friday night, so we're glad to have him here for a couple of weeks. And appreciate that this morning. 2 Timothy chapter 1. 2 Timothy chapter 1. 2 Timothy chapter number 1. What is a mother to do? Well, we're going to tell you today. There's three things I have for you. Many things a mother's to do, but three things. Paul here is writing to young Timothy, and in the first chapter, verse number 5, he talks about Timothy's grandmother and mother. And he says there, 2 Timothy 1:5, when I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that in thee also. He was, of course, telling Timothy that his grandmother and his mother possessed some very special qualities. They had a faith that was unfeigned. It was first seen in grandma, and then in mom, and now in him. And thank God for a cycle of godliness. If you have a cycle of ungodliness, you know what you need to do? Let's break the cycle. We're going to break the cycle. We're going to start a new cycle. We're going to have a cycle of godliness. Now, Eunice and Lois here, the grandmother and the mother, they just didn't talk about their faith. Let me tell you something. They walked their faith. Their faith, the word unfeigned there actually means not fake. It means real. We could say it like this: when I call to remembrance the real faith that is in thee. And a lot of times we wonder sometimes about why things happen. I think it's because some people don't have that real faith. They just didn't send their kids to church. They brought them to church, and they were a part of their spiritual lives. Now, you know very well that we pass down to our children good qualities and bad qualities. I see some of the bad qualities in my kids sometimes, which is it's very few, of course, but very little. But I say, well, I guess they got them from me. They got them from me. But they good qualities and bad qualities. You heard the story, or maybe you've heard a story like this, that a dad, he had a very serious drinking problem. And he, one day, even in the snow, was walking to the local bar. And he was leaving large footprints behind him as he walked. When he was almost to the bar, he looked around, and behind them, a little way back, he saw his son doing his best to stay in Daddy's footprints. He realized he was leading his son in the wrong direction. He immediately turned around, he met his son, and he said, "Son, let's go home. Let's go home." Our children follow us. We lead them. They're following us every way. And so we should, of course, want to live God's way, because His way is perfect. As we looked in Psalm 18 this morning, that His way is perfect. And boy, that is the way we should want to follow for our lives. Three thoughts that I have here this morning on our kids and what's a mother to do. First of all, a mother and father, of course, is to train them. To train them. Mom and Dad, we are to train them. There is a vast, distinct difference between just letting our kids grow up and then training them. A vast difference. If you just kind of let them grow up by themselves, then they're in trouble and you're in trouble. But boy, there is a great difference in training. Matter of fact, the Bible even says that we are to train up a child in the way that he should go. We are to train up a child in the way that he should go. Now, we know that it's our responsibility to train them, but do we know how to train them? Let me give you a couple of thoughts there. It's not really in the outline, but you might want to write this down under. Just a couple of thoughts. Number one, we train them by example. We train them by example. Now, you know that most of what we learn by watching other people. Matter of fact, there's good things we can learn by watching other people, and there's bad things we can learn. A lot of things that I've learned in my life, I've looked at other people and I said, I don't want to do that. A lot of things I've looked at other people and said, yeah, I want to do that. Or I want to be like that. A lot of the things that I've learned in my life, I learned by even watching my father, of course. Even little things of around the house and other things, you learn from just watching. There was a story about a dad who was a television repairman. Of course, you don't have too many of them anymore, but there is a few. And he wanted his 6-year-old son to learn to be a television repairman. This was many years ago. He said, "Son, I want to take you to work with me today, and I want you to start watching me repair television sets so one day you can repair them." Well, they arrived at work, and the father said, "Son, that television set right there came from home. It stopped working. And I think I know what's wrong with it, but I want you to tell me what you think could be wrong with it before you watch me fix it." The son replied. He said, "Dad, you know I love to watch cowboy and Indian movies on that television set. And I think if we would clean out all the old dead cowboys and Indians from the bottom of that set, I believe it would work again." He said, "It's got to be getting crowded after all the cowboys and Indians I've seen killed on that television set." Now again, that's for a little bit older age, but it's very, very true. Most of what we learn today comes by watching. Matter of fact, 70% of our learning comes from information we receive through our eye gate. Only 20% comes from here. And so it's a whole lot better to be able to see something than it is to hear it. One good thing about YouTube, there's some good things about it, there's a lot of bad things about it too, but one good thing about YouTube is you can almost find any video out there to tell you how to do something. It is amazing. If you ever get somewhere and you say, "Well, I don't know how to do this," just look on YouTube and Google it, and I'm telling you, videos come up, and it's amazing what you can see on there. I've got this little sty on my eye. And sometimes it kind of gets in the way. It actually developed during the snowstorm that we had, and I couldn't get to the doctor and to get it fixed. And I had an appointment, and then it snowed, and I couldn't see the doctor for a week. So what developed is a hard sty right on my eyelid here, and it kind of looks bad at times. Matter of fact, some have even said, "Man, what's wrong with your eye?" Well, it's there, and it's not going away. Well, I Googled the other day on maybe something somebody else has done, and somebody said get some rice and put it in a sock and warm it up and stick it on your eye. I said, well, I need to try that. And maybe that'll work. I don't know. I hadn't really tried it all that good yet, but maybe that'll work. You know how you put your phones down in rice to get moisture out of it from time to time. We'll see. Anyhow, that's just something, you saw on YouTube. There's a lot of things like that, and we see that. So most of it comes from learning. Our information comes through the eye gate. And from the time a child is born, Oliver and Nathan here this morning, from the time they're born, let me tell you something. What they're doing, parents, they're watching y'all. They're watching y'all. Now they're listening to y'all, but they're watching y'all, and they're learning. And let me tell you something. If we do right, praise the Lord. If we do wrong, then that's scary. It's real scary. Even the things that we do with our hands and our feet, they're watching that. They're mimicking that. Heidi does those things. I mean, she's learned those things. And let me tell you something. They do that. Most children, like to play mommy and daddy sometimes. Most children do, not all of them. But the kids, the little girls will want to go get mama's clothes and mama's shoes, and the boys will want to go get daddy's clothes and daddy's shoes, and want to dress up just like them and talk just like them. Many of them are carbon copies of mom and dad, and they reflect the likes and dislikes of their parents. So listen, parents, your kids are watching you. You train them by example. So follow God's way. Follow God's word. We also train them by explanation. We train them by example, but we also train them by explanation. Again, much of what we learn is by watching the example of others, but there are some things that sometimes it requires more than just example. It requires an explanation. There are situations that will come up in our relationship with our kids where they need to talk to us and explain what's going on. Listen, parents, you might be real smart, but you may not know everything about everything, and sometimes our kids need to explain what's happened, right? And why things look the way they do. Sometimes we need to talk to them and explain to them, and there needs to be that open communication. Some parents want to do all the talking and none of the listening. Let me tell you something, parents, be careful. Be careful. Be willing to listen to your children. Matter of fact, I don't think there's any of us here this morning that enjoys a conversation with somebody who does all the talking. Those are the kind of conversations I try to get away from as soon as I can. Somebody wants to do all the talking. And so our children, they need to listen, and they need to listen to mom and dad. But there's times, of course, where they need to tell us and talk to us. Matter of fact, there's a story about this little boy, and we'll call him Johnny. They were all around the supper table one night, and little Johnny asked, while everybody's at the supper table, the whole family's around the supper table, he said, "Are worms good to eat?" Are worms good to eat? Now the daddy had a weak stomach, and he almost became sick when he heard that question. And he said, "Johnny, if you open your mouth again while we're eating, I'm going to send you to your bedroom. Do you understand?" When the meal was over, the dad said, "Now, Johnny, I am not mad at you, but I want you to know what made you ask such a question about worms being good to eat while we were eating." Little Johnny said, "I saw one in your salad before you ate him." So maybe you ought to listen to your kids a little bit. Maybe they got something to say that you didn't even realize they had something to say. It was like, and sometimes parents, if you listen, you might find out that you are wrong. The Bible does say, "He that answereth the matter before he heareth it, it's folly and shame unto him." It's like the little boy who was sent to, this was in a Christian school, he was sent to the principal's office almost every day for a spanking. Every time he was sent, he had an explanation for his demeanor. On one occasion, he walked into the principal's office, and the principal's blood pressure shot up because here he is again. Well, the principal just assumed he had misbehaved. So he said, "Well, I'm just going to go ahead and get this over with." He said, "Listen, young man, I'm not going to say a word to you. Just bend over." The little boy bent over, and the principal applied the Board of Education to the seat of knowledge with some pretty good force. Then he told the boy, "Now I want you to go back and apologize to your class and your teacher." The little boy said, "Well, what am I supposed to apologize for?" The principal said, "For misbehaving in class." The little boy replied, "Sir, I was not misbehaving in class." The principal said, "Well, why did the teacher send you to my office?" He said, "She sent me to ask you something." And he got a spanking all because of that. Because the principal just thought and assumed something that wasn't correct. He that answered the matter before he heareth it, it's folly and shame unto it. Parents, be careful about jumping to conclusions without listening to what your children have to say. There was a little boy named Teddy. He had a problem with saying curse words. A friend down the street was going to have a birthday party. And his mother called Teddy's mother and said, "I want to invite little Teddy to come to my son's birthday party. May he come?" Little Teddy's mother agreed to let him go, but she told the lady, "I'm going to let him come to the party, but if he says one curse word, I want you to send him home." Teddy's mother got him ready for the party, warned him that he'd better not say one curse word. If he did, he would be sent home. Little Teddy promised his mother he would not say any curse words. In less than 10 minutes, however, Teddy was walking back toward his house with a frown on his face and a gift still in his hands. His mother grabbed her switch, and before he could open his mouth, she switched him good. Sent him to his room, said, "Say your prayers, you're going to go to bed without any supper tonight. And get over your madness." Said, "I told you before you went to the party, if you said one curse word, that Johnny's mother was going to send you home." And little Teddy said, "I didn't say any curse words." His mother said, "Then why did Johnny's mother send you home?" "Because the party was not this Friday, it's next Friday." We kind of jump to conclusions sometimes. We need to listen. We need to listen. If we're going to train them, we're going to have to do it by example, and that's the way that they're really going to learn. But also there's going to be times of explanation where we talk and they listen, and they talk and we listen. Do not take that for granted. Secondly, we need to love them. We need to love them. We need to train them, and then we need to love them. Listen, it's many times it's a whole lot easier to love them when they're little and they're still on your side, until they get to be know-it-all teenagers sometimes, right? And to love them. All of a sudden, things change. When your kids are little, they want to be like you. When they get a little bit older, they want to be anybody but you. And that's the way it goes sometimes. Well, there's some ways that we need to love them. First of all, and this again in an outline, you may want to write these down underneath that point, but we need to have unconditional love. Unconditional love. I'll remind you this morning that most kids' love is conditional. You know what I mean by that? Most kids' love is conditional. Have you ever noticed this? If you let your kids do something that they want to do, or have something they want to have, they love you. But if you don't want to let them do something they want to do, or let them have something they don't want to have, they don't like you. They have a conditional love. It's based upon the conditions. Well, a parent, of course, should have an unconditional love. And let me tell you something, that is exactly like God's love, of course. And we should love our kids whether they're good or bad or whatever, or anything in between. And we should love our children even when they do not meet our conditions. A lot of times parents do not do this right. And if our kids fail or mess up in some way, boy, I mean, our kids feel like they are not loved, and how sad that is. Because we should love them with an unconditional love. Our love is to be like God's love. I'm thankful for God's love this morning, that it's unconditional. Aren't you this morning? Thankful that God's love is unconditional. There may be other people who misunderstand our children even from time to time. But let me tell you something. We should say, well, they just don't know them the way I know them. And they don't love them the way that I love them. Secondly, we should have an undaunting love. We should love them, and we should have an undaunting love. Undaunting has the idea of not being discouraged. We should not be discouraged. Listen, parenting can be very discouraging. Anything in our life can be very discouraging. But a parent's love has to be an undaunting love. We cannot give up. We cannot become discouraged. We must tell our children over and over and over what's right. And we should tell them that we love them. And we should tell them that we're thankful that God gave them to us. Over and over and over. Do not get discouraged, even when they don't do exactly what we want them to do. But let me tell you something. Keep on keeping on. The rewards can be great. And then, of course, it has to be unbiased as well. If we want to love them properly, it has to be unbiased. Now, here's something that I'm going to say that might be appreciated, it might not be. I don't know. When I was younger, things were different in this regard than they are really now. When I was younger, if a child misbehaved and the teacher called and said, your child misbehaved, the parent then would believe the teacher, of course, and get on to the kid. Now, in many times, in many ways, it's just the opposite. Your child misbehaves and your child is not doing right, and somebody calls you and tells you that, and what do? You get on to the person that calls and tells you that. Let me tell you something, you're creating a monster. We, sad to say, are wanting to punish the teachers and punish the policemen for picking on their kids, instead of telling the kids what they need to do and how they need to behave. And listen, we've got a whole group of people in this world who have been ruined because of that. And you know who they've been ruined by? Their parents. Their parents have ruined them. Because the parents were biased and they took up for their child when they shouldn't have took up for their child. They should have took up for the teacher and for the authority figure in the situation instead of that. Parents need to place the blame for wrongdoings on the right person and not on somebody else. Now, also on the other hand, of course, recognize good in your kids. On the other hand, a lot of times what we do is we're always looking for when our kids mess up, and we make sure we let them know when they mess up. But do you ever tell them that they did something right and something good? Boy, that's the one thing that just, it unnerves me and just aggravates me to the nth degree to see parents who constantly berate their children, looking for something that they do wrong, but never telling them that I love you and I'm proud of you because of you're doing right. Let me tell you something. A kid many times will misbehave. Will misbehave to get your attention because you're not giving them attention when they're doing right. So start giving them a little attention when they're doing right. And it might revolutionize what's going on in the household. Think about it. We're to love our children. And we're to love our children with an unconditional love, an undaunting love, an unbiased love. And then lastly, we're to enjoy them. We're to enjoy them. I tell you, kids are a lot of work. They're a lot of work. But let me tell you something. They're a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun. Jacob and Allie, y'all had any fun yet? Oh, yeah. I tell you. Now, our kids work, you better believe it. But they're a lot of fun. Oliver, he's a lot of fun. Let me tell you something. Miss Heidi, she's a lot of fun. All of our kids. It's amazing. They're enjoy them. Don't think that they have been put there to ruin your life for some reason. They have been put there for you to be able to enjoy them. Somebody said this, if we paid no more attention to our plants than we do to our children, we'd now be living in a jungle. So listen, enjoy them. Here's a thought for you. Do you know there's only one thing you can take to heaven with you that's on planet Earth? You can't take your car, you can't take your house, you can't take your bank account, you can't take your rings and jewelry and whatever else you got. You can't take none of that. It's all going to be left right here. But you can take your kids. You can take your kids. That's the only thing you can take to heaven with you. I think we ought to enjoy our kids in every stage, from birth to being a toddler, all the way up through being in elementary school and junior high school and high school, being a teenager and adolescent, going off to college, all of those things. Let me tell you something. Enjoy it. And I'll remind you, everybody knows it, it goes by fast. Rachel has already been in college for a year. I mean, that is just mind-boggling. I'm just telling y'all, it's mind-boggling. I remember when Rachel was born. It's amazing to think about. And now she's almost 19 and already a year finished in school. It's amazing to think about. And before y'all know it, back over here, this little group and this group right here, let me tell you something. They're going to be 19 years old. And 500 miles away or whatever in school somewhere. That's what they're going to be. So enjoy them. And God has given us this awesome responsibility to raise them for Him. I read this story about this 5-year-old girl. She was asked by a preacher. She said, "How many children are there in your family?" She said, "My parents have 7 children." The minister said, "Boy, that must have cost your parents a lot of money for all those kids." She said, "No, sir, my parents didn't buy them. They just raised them." That's what we're trying to do. Listen, your kids are an absolute gift from God. They are. They're a gift from God. Look at it that way. Don't look at it as a burden. Look at it as a blessing. And those hundreds, millions of questions and things they do, and then all the troubles, that they get in and do things that, that are not exactly right, and they spray paint things they ought not to spray paint, and all those kind of things. When it gets real quiet in the house, You say, I better go check on the kids. Something's happening. I love watching them America's Funniest Home Videos of all those big sisters that have painted their little sisters with permanent marker all over their face and body and everything else. Or they've gone in there and they've poured all the baby powder out all over the carpet and everything and everywhere. Somebody on one of those America's Funniest Home Videos won $100,000 because their kids poured something all over everything and was talking about it and blaming the other one and all this and that and the other. They won $100,000 out of that. So maybe we ought to try that. Huh? I'll pass. Listen, they're a gift from God. Absolute gift from God. They are a blessing, not a burden. Enjoy them. I mean, just enjoy them. Laugh. I mean, there's so many things our kids do that are so funny. And they say the craziest things. We were at, this was when John was probably 8 or 9 years old. Maybe 10, I don't know. We were at Disney World. And we was riding a couple of them rides that I never will ride again. The Tower of Terror and that rock and rolling roller coaster. Let me tell you, I will never get on those things again. I'm telling you. And see, that's, God gave us John when we was young, so we had to do it. But let me tell you something. Anyhow, he was about 8 or 9, 10 years old. He got to talking, we was talking, and he's talking about his honeymoon. And he's talking about, I'm going to come back here on my honeymoon. Now, he's about 8 or 9 years old, He said, and it's going to be me and my wife and my nephew Josiah. And I'm going to bring him with us. And we're going to come on our honeymoon because I want him to be able to come with me on this thing. And I thought to myself, son, you're not going to want Josiah to be there. And I bring that up to him every so often and remind him of that now that he's thinking about one day getting on a honeymoon here, I don't think he's going to bring his nephew with him now at all. But see, we laugh about that. We enjoy that. It's funny. It's wonderful. Enjoy your kids. I wonder if when the shadows fall on the last short earthly day, when we say goodbye to the world outside, all tired with our childish play, when we step out into that other land where Mother so long has been, will we hear her ask as we did of old, are all the children in? A man had lived a sinful life. He had neglected his wife and son. The son grew up lacking many of the essentials of life and had very little going for him. The dad never realized what he had did to his wife and son until many years later. The dad was in jail. And the sheriff brought a new man in to share his cell with him. And it just so happened it was his son. It was his son. For the first time in his life, that dad realized he had not only destroyed his life, he had destroyed his son's life. But I'll tell you, there's something far worse than that. One day, many parents are going to stand before God and hear the Lord say, "Depart from me, for I never knew you." And they're going to be sent to a place called hell, where they will spend an eternity. And I guess what will make hell even more of a terrible place is the fact that they're going to look around and they're going to see their children that they've led straight there to that place called hell. I can't think of anything worse than that. I don't want to lead my children to hell. I want to lead them to heaven. Is that what you want to do this morning? I pray that you will. Heads are bowed and eyes are closed.